I'm still recovering from like a slight cough, so I apologize in advance. You're gonna probably have to cut out a lot of coughs.
No
I will
worries.
pause, so then you know to cut it off, and you're not like cutting me off mid sentence or anything.
It's a good editing cue. Yeah, I also think I have tonsillitis, so I'm sorry
I'm keeping
if
all
I
of your coughs.
sound kind of messed up.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Keep them.
I'll probably be emphasizing them and just making everything else. Yeah.
You really get the phlegm. Like I need that, like the base of the phlegm. You know.
Yeah.
Just
Don't
like,
worry. I'll EQ it so that it really comes through. I'll put it into like an Adobe sound stage.
It's a rough sickness season. I feel like everyone I know has been sick forever.
Oh yeah. I made like a massive vat of bone broth yesterday. So I'm like committed.
I saw that. Your bone broth looked good. Like it was clear. I usually don't get mine to be very clear, but yours is like nice and pretty.
Mine, because I literally only used like I went to Halal Butchers and they had whole cow's feet for sale.
Like paya.
Already very clean. Yeah, like paya. And it was like very clean already. Like when I went to like clean it, there was like nothing to really clean before I started cooking with them. So I think that's why it was so clear.
Nice. Do you blanch them before?
It does taste very
did you roast them?
Yeah. No, I didn't roast them or blanch.
You just threw them straight into the pot?
No, I used like a unused, obviously, toothbrush to clean them and scrub them really well. So that's how my mom taught me.
Aww.
Because she makes,
That sounds delicious.
Because then you lose all the goodness. That's what she said.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to the Feel Between. We should probably do like a round of names. I'm Yasmin.
I'm Ahmed, and we're joined by our friend Zainab, who is an attorney in Pennsylvania. Can I say that?
No, I'm actually an Ontario barred attorney. So I'm a Canadian attorney. I live in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I do most of my work remote. My husband's a Pennsylvania attorney. If you want him on.
No, we want you.
Yeah, bring him on.
Yeah. So we don't need
get him over there.
A woman. You need a man.
Yeah.
Get that husband.
The men here will talk law. Who cares about this Islamic studies scholar?
That makes sense. So you can't immediately start practicing in the U.S., the different legal system and everything. That's cool that you're able to work remotely.
Yeah, it's been really good. I actually work for a Muslim-owned firm who've been very accommodating, and my work is primarily in family, but I also do criminal defense as well. So a lot of it is remote. I just fly back or drive back for anything in person.
You're in Philly, right?
Yeah.
I think we're hoping to go to Philly in like, was it 2 weekends? Not this week.
Oh yeah,
sometime in February. Yeah, but we'll definitely let you know if you're around. It'd be cool.
Yeah, let us know. We have to. We'll be around.
Nice.
Cool.
Well, that'll be fun. Yeah.
Wait, so before we get started into, because I've got a lot of questions about like what it's like being a lawyer, working with Muslims, and if there's any intersection with, I just taught a class on fiqh and sharia, so I think it'd be cool to think about like practical applications of those issues. But I feel like you two have a really cool story of how you met, if you want to really briefly talk about that.
Oh man,
you don't have to get into any like identifying details, but it's kind of it's pretty cool.
Well, we haven't even really met.
Well, that's right.
Yeah. Became friends online during pandemic on Clubhouse, which is now defunct. I don't know.
Definitely
not. It's just full of people. I think it's full of a lot of right wingers, and then I think the moan rooms. Those are still. I think those are still the holidays now.
Yeah, those are still going. It's mostly like Bitcoin scammers.
Oh no.
And then like the Muslim guys doing just saying that should women be allowed to like have a job?
Yeah. But there was a brief shining moment during COVID where it seemed like y'all created a really cool community. And I have to say, I thought it was like, I did not get what the app was and I thought it was strange, but every single person we've met that Ahmed met through it has been like amazing. It's been really cool to see.
Yeah, it's funny because we met on Clubhouse and it was just like a very brief golden time where it was like a great sense of community and everyone like kind of isolating because of obviously the pandemic. And my husband, who wasn't my husband at the time, he also was like, similarly to you, Yasmin, was like, what is this? Like, why do you spend all your evenings talking to these weird people? And yet here we are,
Yeah.
still talking to each other.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I've
Still
met
in
a
audio.
few of those people in person, but and maybe soon we'll be in Philly and we'll get to all meet up. Inshallah.
Yeah, but inshallah.
Yeah. All right.
How
so
inappropriate. Sorry.
Wait, what were you gonna say?
I don't know, like
how inappropriate.
Like I made a joke about like the moan rooms on Clubhouse, but I don't know like
oh my God.
if
it's really totally up to your level of comfort. Like I don't think we're gonna be offended by anything, but also
like,
again,
I have a very like unhinged sense of humor.
Oh yeah.
So does Ahmed, so I think it's probably gonna be a good conversation. But
good. Okay. All right. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead. Ahmed,
No.
You were saying.
I guess maybe can you give us a little bit more of a bio about you kind of started to, but about your practice in law, and then I'll kind of introduce what we're here to talk about today, which is getting into some discussion about family law as it intersects with Muslims, with your practice, and kind of how you are able to kind of square away a kind of a, I guess like a, if you practice in mostly Canada, right, like that legal system with, you know, a Islamic law system as it relates to marriage.
Not that you necessarily like follow a particular, but yeah, I think exactly like how those things intersect in practical would be really cool. Yeah.
I think that, for sure. I mean, I guess I could start sort of at the beginning where I actually went to law school in the UK. I'm originally a UK citizen. So I did my law school there, and I was very, and I'm also South Asian. So I was very much enmeshed in the South Asian diaspora within the UK, which is a very, I would say, interesting community. Most people, I would say most Muslims in like America and Canada, their only real exposure to like UK Muslims is through Twitter, which is obviously going to show you perhaps the more questionable sides of that community.
That's actually been totally my exposure. Yeah.
So and like that was my like community that I was very much a part of growing up. And still am a part of, because most of my mom's side of the family still lives in the UK, although I think actually now they're sort of scattered out and out, but still the link is there. So that's where I went to law school, although I'm also a Canadian citizen, and my goal was always to come back to Ontario where my parents live to practice law. I got my law degree. In Canada, you have to do obviously your bar exam and then articling, and then you're a full-fledged lawyer. So I was called to the bar in
Wait, sorry, really dumb. Quick question. What is articling?
Yeah.
What was the word you said?
So articling. So articling is basically, it can be, I think, like about 8 months to a year of basically your interning. It's like a paid internship you do with a firm or a lawyer.
Got it. Thanks.
So that's basically what it is, but it's a requirement to get called to the bar. So while I was called to the bar in February 2023, I had been articling for about a year, and in the same practice areas that I'm in right now, which is family law, and then more recently I've been doing criminal defense. So while I would definitely consider myself a young lawyer, a baby lawyer, I guess is like the colloquial term that a lot of people in the field use. Even in my short time, I've had a lot of exposure to a myriad of different family law situations, but primarily like my practice focuses on the Muslim community. And that's not by design necessarily. Obviously, I'm identify as Muslim. I'm South Asian. My bosses are also Muslim as well. And we're based in Toronto, which has a huge Muslim population. So naturally, when people are seeking a lawyer, they're going to seek somebody who has a similar experience to them, because it removes a barrier, not just a language barrier, but a cultural barrier, so that, you know, we hear certain stories from our clients And over time, there are certain situations that just come up and up and up again. And it's so familiar, right? Not just because of my own experience growing up as a Pakistani woman, but also just through my practice. And I would say that while there are certain issues within a breakdown of any relationship that's universal, there are certain contexts that are obviously so particular to the Muslim community that I see time and time again, and I find it so troubling. And so it's even sort of informed my advice I give to like my younger sister or my younger cousins and stuff, and like how you should seek a partner for yourself. And it informed my decision as well. I got married when I was 31, and I've been practicing since 2023, but I've very much been in the family law world for a lot longer than that. And I think at times it scared me, like the whole prospect of getting married was definitely scary, but it also, I would say it's given me a bit of a better understanding on what's important when you're seeking out a partner, and a lot of I would say the pitfalls involved in relationships. So, but yeah, it's a very, very interesting area of practice. It's something I personally feel very passionate about. Yeah. Sorry.
So that's interesting. So you're saying your exposure to law, and I guess specifically family law, like made you think about how you approach a relationship or a partnership, and that some things kind of scared you, or you maybe felt hesitant about, had some fears, I guess. But what sorts of things were you seeing that you were kind of like, I need to watch out for this, or hope I don't experience this, or think about it as I, look for a partner?
And I would just add on to that, because it's a great question. Are there any kind of like protections that you took, or kind of resources that you learned that you thought were helpful?
So, it's funny. My husband is also an attorney, and we did not sign a prenup. We got married without a prenup, which I think is a lot of people find interesting, because obviously I'm in family law, but the prenup is not so much as important as who you are choosing and why you are choosing them. And so for me, I noticed time and time again, there's such an immense pressure in and I would say I can only really speak for the South Asian Muslim community, but I've heard similar stories from the Arab diaspora, the Somali diaspora, that there's a similar pressure to get married young and to get married to whomever is just good enough, especially for women, right?
Yes.
If he ticks all the boxes, right? If he's got a job, he prays, he's able-bodied, right? There you go. What
knows how
more
to make
could
declarative sentences?
Yes, he can speak. He can, ableism aside. Wow, right?
He does not need to be inquisitive. He just needs to be able to make direct declarative statements.
Exactly, and it's that whole sense of and it's so interesting because it's paired with a sense of telling young women that you're not really worth anything more than just the absolute bog standard. Like, if you want something particular, who are you to ask that, right? And on the other end, when I see people, because people come to me once their relationships have completely broken down, right? And they and time and time again, I see the same stories. They're pushed into it. It was when they say arranged, because arranged marriages aren't, the terrible thing that a lot of people seem to think they are. It's just me. It means that maybe perhaps the introduction was done through family, but you're still able to get to know and choose each other on your own terms, right? But these are real, how we, I guess, sort of typically perceive what an arranged marriage is, where they only met once or twice. The discussions were done by the family, and either one side or both sides were pressured into marrying each other, or neither the husband or the wife really advocated for themselves throughout the process. and really thought about who it was they were marrying. They just looked at the basics. They didn't really think it was worth looking beyond anything than just, oh, she's attractive. Oh, yeah, he makes money. There we go. Let's get married. And then they're in my office, 5, 6, 7 years later, 3 kids later, telling me either stories of abuse, whether it's physical, sexual, emotional. Emotional neglect is most often like the case I hear, and just like complete and utter incompatibility, absent of anything else really. So I always think that there's just a lack of thought and care in our communities when it comes to marriage.
Do you find that a lot of? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say I really feel you on I think we didn't do a prenup either, but I not to like disparage that, because I think that for some people that makes a lot of sense, but that the first thing you can control for is like who you choose as a partner. And then even like going through this process kind of made you thoughtful about that. And I also really feel you on, I got married at, I was 29, so it was like right before I was 30. And I feel like there was such a sense of like, congratulations, like as if like it would have been such a problem if I had been over 30. Or also because I was in the middle of my studies and like getting my doctorate, there's a sense of like, oh, thank goodness, like maybe you were going to be too busy for this. And it was just like, of course I was so happy to get married and to like meet Ahmed, but like almost as if that was like an accomplishment of a sense, or like a ticking a box. And it was an accomplishment. But the thing is like it was an accomplishment because I like fell in love, not because I was like it was going to be sad if I was alone. Do you know what I mean? Like from a place of like happiness instead of a place from fear. So I don't know. I really resonate with that.
You also got such a great guy.
I did, of course. No, I'm so grateful. But I just mean the sense of like, I don't know, like sadness for women when they don't find someone, as if they're like less of a person when they don't have like a Muslim man, or like this idea of like, well, why don't you just settle? Or like, maybe it's a problem that you're too ambitious, that you're too busy, like, yeah, I don't know.
Or that's like, oh, she's going to be okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I felt it was. And it was, I feel like it was more like an additive, like, oh, I'm so grateful I found my person and I'm so happy, but not like, oh, I was going to like fail in life if I was alone. Does that make sense?
So I guess that's part of that pressure that you were talking about.
Yeah. I resonated with some of what you were saying.
Yeah. So we actually talked about marriage for a while. Like right when we met, we kind of knew that it would go toward that, and that was the ultimate Muslim goal. Yeah. So, a couple months before we, did it, like we started talking about our nikah contract. And then we also started seeing a couples therapist, just because not because anything was wrong, but like because we were kind of using it as like premarital counseling to a certain extent. Did you find that was at all encouraged in the cases that you saw, or like not really?
No, not at all. Not at all. Even so online, what me and my husband had used was, there's this list, and I think it was developed by an imam or a masjid somewhere in the States, called 100 questions to ask for your, like, to a potential, right, to understand your compatibility. And it took us a few months to get through those questions, and we'd already been friends at that point for, I don't know, like maybe half a year, right? Just friends. And then there was, mutual, like, okay, I like you, let's see where this goes. And so we started going through these 100 questions, and it takes time, right? It takes time to go through those questions and understand each other and get to know each other, and have and always also come from this like perspective of complete open honesty and frankness about everything, which includes finances, and it doesn't mean having to divulge any sordid parts of like your past, right? But just about an open and honest frankness about who you are and where you stand and how you view the world and how you operate in different contexts, right? That takes time. And what I see, and I don't speak to the couples, so just to be clear, when somebody comes into my office, obviously I'm only representing one side of a marital breakdown. But the stories I hear are so regular. I have a student in my office who's now, like, I have her sit in on my intakes that I do with my clients. And after an intake I had with a client who told me about the breakdown of her marriage, She said, wow, how did you like almost predict what she was going to say? She would say something and you would literally finish her sentence. Like, how did you do that? And I said, because I've heard her story at this point at least 50 different times. And the story is, and I'm just giving like a very generic version, right? And this is the typical story here is girl gets married to a guy, and they don't really get to know each other. They do not take time to understand each other. The families are heavily involved, and all the discussion and the deciding is done between the families. Girl moves in to her in-laws' home. She thinks everything's fine, big wedding, great send-off, and then the abuse starts. And it doesn't start from the husband; it starts from the in-laws, right? And it's and what I find egregious, because like difficult in-laws aren't. It's not something that happens rarely. It's a very normal part of life if you're married, and you may have like difficulty navigating a relationship with an in-law, right? But what bolsters you is if your partner has your back. But the story here is always husband just stood there and watched. Husband didn't intervene. Husband didn't advocate for me. I had children and the husband still didn't advocate for me or my child. And then what ends up happening as it progresses is husband begins participating in the abuse, whether it's emotional or neglectful or sexual or physical. It always seems to start that way. And, the troubling thing, I feel like I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. Like the issue I always find is when I look at like there's so much online discourse on marriage in Muslim communities, which I always find irritating because it's most often done by men who aren't married or men who are I don't know. I don't want to say that they're all like abusers or abusing their wives, but I wouldn't exactly turn to them for like an example of a healthy model of a relationship. And in the Muslim community, in online Muslim communities, I find what's lauded in how to find a spouse and how to navigate your marriage is if there's very minimal interaction before the marriage, and the wife just sort of blindly and obediently listens to whatever the husband wants, and that's kind of like their thesis in terms of like what constitutes the perfect Islamic marriage. And I'm here on the other side saying no, like that's like a recipe for disaster.
That's just like patriarchy using Islamic language. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. I'm so sorry. I think something is burning. I'm going to be right back.
1 second. Sorry. It definitely smells like something's burning.
No worries.
Every day we be burning, not concerning what nobody wanna say. We be earning dollars, turning, cause we minded for we pay. More than gold and oil and diamonds, girls, we need them every day. Recognize it, we pimping as we riding.
Was the stove on?
Okay, we're good. It was our neighbors grilling.
Okay, good.
Good.
As you were talking, I was going to ask you, do you see often cases, I've got two questions. One, do you see cases of financial abuse often? And the other is, and if this is not relevant, then don't worry about it, but do people's nikah contracts like come up during these divorce proceedings or? Yeah.
So to answer the first question, I do often see financial abuse. Now, I don't think it's unnatural or not normal for one person in a marriage to be the person who manages the household finances, right? And for the other person not to be unaware, but just to be kind of sort of kept in the loop and has access to any of the accounts and cards or whatever, so they know as well what's going on, right? That's normal. What I would categorize as financial abuse is any time where one person in the marriage, refuses to disclose anything of the finances and doesn't add their partner onto their bank accounts or their cards, or onto onto the name of their like any properties or anything, like their marital home. And I'll get into that whole thing in a bit, but you know, I would say that's sort of like kind of the basis of where financial abuse starts. I've also seen cases where husbands will refuse to put their wives on any of their accounts and only put their mother on there or their father on there, right? And sort of hold that over their wife's head. You know, this money isn't for you. This money isn't for your kids. It's for my mom, right? As though the wife is nothing and his children are nothing, right? And then in some of the worst cases I've seen partners take out loans. So yeah, some of the worst cases of financial abuse I've seen is where one partner will take out loans, lines of credit in their partner's name fraudulently and like sign their signature on it, or any credit card that's in their partner's name, they'll use it to like they'll max it out, right? And they won't pay them back. So, you know, financial abuse, you know, I see it often. In terms of like the nikah contract and the meher, I mean, I haven't, you know, seen a case where a meher has been brought up and a nikah contract has been brought up to enforce a payment of the meher on separation. That actually, in Canada at least, wouldn't be considered a family law issue, although it could be folded into it. But whenever I've come across it, I said, if you have a contract and it's been signed and witnessed, and it clearly outlines that a payment needs to be made to you if you two divorce Islamically, and then take it to the civil court, right?
Oh, interesting.
Because it's not really considered a family law issue, because an Islamic marriage isn't legally recognized in Ontario. Right. And it's not really legally recognized in the UK or the US either. And that's a whole other can of worms that I'm sure we'll get into at some point. I don't want to jump the gun by jumping
that's
into.
Great. Yeah, I've heard it's not that common in the US, but have been like a handful of cases where like it's somehow been honored. I think there have also been cases where people actually made it kind of a prenup, which I guess then is very different. But that's interesting that it wouldn't be like a family law issue.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely categorize a nikah contract as a premarital contract or a prenup, because you know the nikah contract can be customized, and you know either party can add any reasonable like demands in there of what they expect for the marriage, right? And one of the things that you can put in, and again, I'm not a Sharia law or Sharia fiqh expert, but my understanding is that as a woman, you can actually ask to reserve one of the talaqs, right, so that the husband can't unilaterally divorce you. But you know, to ask for that right before you get married requires the couple to already have a good understanding of each other, and have already an ability to communicate. Because if you ask that of someone who you barely know, you know, that would make them balk. They'd go, oh, are you trying to get out of this? Right?
And then your point that, it doesn't automatically translate to Canadian law makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So when these people, I guess I'm assuming mostly women that you've seen in these cases, when they're kind of coming to you and saying like, oh, I've been a victim of, you know, financial abuse, or like I'm trying to get out of this situation, I guess, are they, because I've heard stories about people getting like quote Islamically married and doing a ceremony but not having a marriage recognized by the state to back it up. Are you seeing those cases where like, because I'm sitting here and I'm kind of in shock that someone is able to, you know, saddle their partner with debt and then just leave and not have joined in that debt, you know, in some way that's traceable back to them, and they're also on the hook for it. But Are you seeing cases like that at all?
So I'm hearing about these cases, but not in Ontario, and there's a reason for that. Because in Ontario, there is a laws around what constitutes a common law marriage, right? And so common law marriage is if two people are not married but cohabiting, and either have been living together for 3 or more years or have a child together, and so there's certain conditions attached to for your relationship to be viewed as a common law marriage. So when you're married legally, you are automatically afforded certain rights as a married couple. One of them being that if you purchase a house together, it doesn't matter if, for example, the husband pays all of the down payment, is the only person on the name of the mortgage, and the wife doesn't, quote unquote, contribute anything financially. If those two divorce, both of them have an automatic 50% right, or a right to 50% of the equity in the home, right? And that's because when you get legally married, the law recognizes that these two people are legally bound and are working together as sort of like in sort of like a joint enterprise, right? They're married for the purposes of building a life together. And so while one party may not be contributing financially, they're contributing in what they put into the home, whether they're caring for it, maintaining it, raising the kids in it. It's usually always like in marriages, it sort of kind of ends up like that, right? So that, and so when you're married, the court automatically considers that as that this is what the context of the relationship is. So both of you get a 50% equity, right to a 50% equity in the marital home, and a right to an equalization payment of all of the joint assets minus the debts and everything that you've accrued during the period of the marriage. When you're a common law married, you first have to establish, well, does my relationship count as a common law marriage? And again, I'm speaking about Ontario law, and I'll speak about Pennsylvania and England in a moment. So once if you fit those criteria, then you have to actually prove to the court, well, we bought this home together, and I should be given, X amount from the equity, whether it's 50% or 10% or something. You have to prove to the court that, you've been carrying on essentially like a married couple, that one person benefited from you contributing non-financially to the home, right? That by being the person who stays at home and raises the kids and cooks and cleans, that the other person, the other partner in the common law marriage, has been able to benefit from that and go out and work, right? Because if they didn't have that person, then they would have to be home,
right?
But that's and obviously it's very difficult, even though Canada has laws that help people who are in a common law relationship that's broken down. It's still a very costly litigation process, right? You have to fight, and you have to show receipts, and you have to prove everything. In the UK, there's no such thing as common law marriage. There's no such thing. You're either legally married or you're not, right? So it doesn't really matter if, you've had a long-term boyfriend or someone who you're religiously married to. Sorry, 1 second. It doesn't matter if you're, you have a boyfriend or girlfriend or a partner who you are religiously married to. If you buy a house together, and then you split up, right? If you didn't contribute anything to that home, but you were, cooking in it, cleaning it, maintaining it, raising the kids in it, you walk away with nothing because you didn't contribute financially, and you don't have your relationship has no legally identified definition, right?
Would the only
And that's being
would the only like potential for enforcement be that if you again had something written up like a nikah, you'd try to like enforce that in a civil court there?
it's been so again, like I don't know thoroughly if it's been successful, but my understanding is it's not actually been very successful because at the end of the day, like if you are if it, like nobody really writes in a nikah contract, oh, if you know we split up, you get 50% equity in this and you get equal, because there's not just
We
the
did.
house that you nice
Yeah.
good for you guys.
But I guess we're also legally married, so it doesn't really matter.
And you're
Yeah,
totally right.
exactly.
In
You
the
already
U.S.,
have-
from what I've read, it's similar that it hasn't been very successful. There's only a handful of cases. Yeah, it's not common here either. Yeah.
We're talking about like a very sophisticated, like it has to be a fairly sophisticated and well thought out document. Most couples aren't going to lawyers to draft these contracts, right? They're like either downloading them or getting them from a masjid and just signing their name on the dotted line, right? That's the case that's what's happening, right?
Yeah.
But on top of that, we have people who advocate for legal for Islamic marriages only, especially in the UK. In Ontario, I find it's better. For example, I wasn't allowed to have my nikah unless me and my husband were already legally married. So we actually had...
that was the same thing for us, thank goodness.
Yeah, which is really good. But, you know, that's not a legal obligation that's been put on imams in mosques or whatever, because being an imam isn't like, you're not a certified imam, you know.
Right.
Obviously, like it just depends on the community that you serve. Obviously, many communities are sophisticated enough to know that, okay, an imam has to be somebody who was a student of knowledge, who actually has like an ijazah to, teach and lead a congregation, right? But, you know, there's certain communities and communities within communities where, you know, they're just like, oh, we love Brother Ted. You know, he's so great. He's our imam now, right?
I think kind of, as you said, I think the reason why that's become so common, at least in the U.S., that you have to make sure that you at least have like paperwork to show that you filed to get married is because there were instances of financial abuse where women didn't, especially often women, didn't realize that they weren't married in the state's eyes, and then they didn't have the same protections.
Exactly.
So I'm glad that imams have adapted.
They've adapted. They've adapted, and which is great. But I think in the UK, it's not really the case. Like, if you are a man who's bent upon only having a nikah with no legal marriage, and your regular imam says, no, you need to get legal marriage first and I'll perform your nikah, no problem. There's like 10 other imams he can find that will do a nikah for him, no issues, right? And for me, like, what is my big head scratcher is I just want to understand the psychology behind it. What is the psychology? Like, it's because to me, how I perceive it is immense greed on the part of these young men who are being almost coached online to say, no, you should never, ever agree to a legal marriage because, you know, your wife can just walk away with half of your house and half of your assets. And like, you know, what a hoe for wanting, 50% equity in the home that she helped turn into a home with you and raise her children in with you. Like, why should she deserve it? It's rooted in greed and such a complete disregard for women.
Yeah.
That I find so unbelievably sad, because this has become an issue now that's just been exploited again and again and again. And how I'm viewing it is it's not going away until the UK and certain states as well enact laws that state that if somebody has a nikah, it should be, viewed as a legal marriage, or at least in the UK, bring in some legal definitions of what a common law marriage is, because these women are like being left with nothing. And then of forced to stay in an abusive dynamic because they'll realize, well, I don't even have a legal marriage. And if he divorces me Islamically, I'm just going to be out on the street with nothing. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to your point, so I had a tweet that I had queued. I was going to read it jokingly at the end here, but since you mentioned like psychologically what is going on in some of these guys' heads, right? Like, I don't want to say everyone is looking to this guy, but there are a number of like influencers out there. And like you said, Zainab, like I think there are a lot of guys who do this form of like really pernicious preaching that talk about women are just out to get you, right? Like all you do as a man is work under this horrible like capitalist system. You toil, you compete, and then there's this woman who, as soon as she digs her claws into you, that's it. Like you're done. But I'd seen a tweet by Andrew Tate, who
Oh God.
famously converted to Islam. And it goes like this. And I think it is kind of a good summary, or it encapsulates like a little bit of the psychology at play here. Quote, men want to work, women want fun. Analyze fun in this world. What is fun? It's evil. It's haram. Real men want to build. Women only want to feel good at the expense of the real world. Adam gave everything. What did she do? So it seems like there's like this like millennia long angst toward the Adam and Eve origin story. Like they still are mad that whatever, but yeah, I do think there's like this feeling, and like men are in certain spaces just kind of like reinforcing this idea that all we do is work, all we do is suffer, and we try, and like women, they don't do anything, right? Which gets back to the idea that, if a guy pays for a home or whatever because he has a job that in the market is valued monetarily, all the work that, and we're going by very like gendered binary roles here, right? But like the work that the other partner does at home to maintain it, etc., is not valued. And so therefore people are put in situations where when one party just decides like they want to up and leave and they have kind of more financial power in the situation, then the other person's kind of screwed.
And it's so ironic because I feel like this idea, like the principle behind like a lot of prophetic teachings of like caring for your family, but also even like thinking about like the classical age of fiqh and thinking about nikah contracts, like the principle was within that context to like obviously care for women, provide them protection. So like that you would then promote what in our modern day society is equivalent to women not being protected, but like not getting legally married is just like ironic and like a silly loophole. Like you're not staying true to like, I think the spirit of what was intended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And this issue is absolutely obviously not only within the Muslim community.
True.
Yeah.
I remember, I can't remember who it was. I think it was some sort of governor or senator or representative who was caught on video berating his pregnant wife, and he was like verbally abusing her. To be clear, this is a white man and a white woman in America.
This wasn't Steven Crowder, was it? It was a comedian?
Oh, I think so. No, I don't know, actually. I can't remember the name. Maybe you can fix that in post.
Yeah, hold up. But I think this story sounds familiar to me too. Okay, keep going.
Right. So one of the things that he said that really stuck out to me was that, it's so unfair that a woman can just divorce her husband if she chooses to, right? And he was almost advocating for the removal of no-fault divorces, that, if you want to divorce me, there has to be a reason, and you need to give evidence for that. And to be clear, a no-fault and out-fault divorce, the difference is no-fault divorce means like you've just been separated for a year, and you can be separated from your partner and still living with them, to be clear. Because some people are able to move out of the home that they live in with their ex-partner until they can, figure things out for themselves. So that's called a no-fault divorce. That's for Ontario. I'm sure in state to state it may differ. There may be a shorter period of time for separation, or maybe no period of time required at all. And then an at-fault divorce is if you want an immediate divorce, you want to sever, ties. Again, this is Ontario law. You'd have to demonstrate that an at-fault divorce is required on the grounds of either cruelty or adultery, right? And then provide some form of evidence. Either way, most people, I don't, in my practice, I have not encountered anyone who has asked for an at-fault divorce. I usually recommend against it, to be honest, because I find that it's actually very traumatizing for clients and very costly in terms of litigation. But in any case, there is, you have a right to divorce. Either party has a right to separate from their partner. But now I'm hearing that there is like a movement, in like the more Republican states to get rid of no-fault divorces.
Oh shit, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and again, it all stems back down to the same thing. That is this like right-wing men's rights, like extremist ideology that's definitely like, been so pervasive and has crept into every community now. But especially in like obviously our experiences with like the Muslim community, so that's where we see it so strongly. And it's just at the end of the day a complete and utter disregard for women, enablement of violence against women. Because this guy he was upset that his pregnant wife, who he was abusing, could leave him, right? He wanted her to stay in that abusive dynamic. He wanted to continue abusing her. He was advocating, and what men are advocating for is the right to abuse their female partners, right? And I don't know how to like end that sentence, but that really
no,
is.
I mean, that's crazy that they would try and like retract that legal right. That's so interesting.
Yeah, and so the outcome of that is that in a legal system, the bar is much higher for trying to leave, and much more costly for trying to leave.
I didn't actually know the distinction between no fault or fault divorce.
Yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I think, and they got rid of like it used to be a rule that you had to show a reason to the courts as to why you want to get divorced, right? And for a long time, even if you had to show it, like the courts would just accept it. Like, I just hate his guts, or, she just annoys me. I can't stand her. Fine, whatever. Here's your divorce. But now they got rid of that because I think, when you look at the law, it has to obviously, it's supposed to reflect the like current, I guess, moral compass of the community it serves. And so the idea that, you have to provide a reason as to why you want to divorce someone to the court is seen as like onerous and unacceptable and, ripe for abuse.
That's so interesting.
So
yeah.
That's why we have no.
And I guess also reflective of like shifting narratives of marriage that it's more of like a choice to be together than like something that should be like a burden. Yeah, or like
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, like all like Canadian law, American law, British law, it's all very much, in many aspects informed by Christianity and Christian principles of what is right and what is wrong. But most especially we see that in family law. So, in Ontario, at least, the family law landscape and is constantly changing in terms of like new legal precedents being made and new ways to litigate issues that come up and up and up and again and again and again. But even those get, taken over and abused by largely men. So, for example, there's this whole concept of parental alienation where, it's illegal and wrong. And this is Ontario and also in, I believe, several states in the U.S. where not illegal, but it's not allowed for one parent to denigrate the other parent to the children, right? Fair enough. But now we have cases where, men and some women will say, oh, the the children don't like me because of how I abuse the mother. That's the mother's fault for having them even aware that the abuse was happening, and I'm being alienated from my child, and that's for that. So that my ex-partner is actually abusing our children. But yeah, it's just, it comes up in issues of where there's been abuse, and the abuser is the one who's pointing his finger to the partner who he abused, saying, "You're alienating our children from me by trying to protect them from my abuse."
And it could just be because the children have also just themselves observed the abuse and,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. The children are traumatized. Mm. And what's shocking and appalling is the courts will say, yeah, that is parental alienation.
Oh, shit,
and
really?
They will they'll have police enforcement orders requiring children to be dragged by police and put into the care of the abusive partner. Right?
Yeah.
And I should, I represent a wide array of people in my practice. So I represent men, I represent women. Obviously, there's certain files that I won't touch, but, there's a lot of, I don't assume that all men are abusers. Statistically, they are. That's not my first assumption.
Wait, statistically, all men are abusers, or all abusers are men?
I think the second.
The latter?
Or many are. Many
are. Statistically, it just seems to be that most and look, when you look at the domestic violence statistics, and my whole thing is, I always say, honor killing is not something that is specific to Muslim communities.
Yeah.
Every day in the US, in Canada, in white families, in black families, in Asian families, and it's who are not Muslim at all, right? Honor killing is just I would say almost all domestic abuse that leads to murder.
100%. Yeah. I'm curious and this is a question because I don't really know anything about this, but how much freedom do you have with deciding not to take cases if you just kind of feel like there are cases that you wouldn't be comfortable with?
Yeah, so I have I'll talk to my boss, who's the partner, and I'll say, look, this is the story. This is the case. I don't feel comfortable, right? And we'll have a discussion about it. Why don't I feel comfortable? Because, it's interesting. Socially, I know that there's obviously a very important narrative of, believe all victims and believe all women, right? But, having worked in the domestic violence sector or area, whatever you'd like to call it, for so many years, I wouldn't say I'm have some internal factometer in my head where I can tell if somebody's lying and I can tell if somebody's being factual. But there are certain instincts and gut responses I'll have when somebody is telling me something, and I can tell listen, I believe that something terrible may have happened to you, but I don't think that you're recounting it. Again, this is not something I would ever say to them personally, but this is just my own internal discussion I'm having with myself, that I don't think that they're actually being honest 100%. And the thing is when you're practicing law, the lawyer-client relationship is very important. It has to be predicated upon honesty, right? Even before trust, you have to be honest with me. And so, there have been cases where I've spoken to someone and I've been I don't really buy the story that they're telling. And this is men and women, right? It goes both ways. And I just don't quite believe it. And sometimes I've actually taken on clients like that. And in my representation of them, I have been able to sort of break down what, their story a little bit, and sort of kind of, I wouldn't say I'm in any way therapizing them at all, because when my clients start to tell me about their whole life story and how hard they've had it, and it's not really relevant to the facts that I need to draft their materials or represent them in court, I kind of shut them down and I say, do you have somebody you can talk to about this? Because I'm not the right person, because I'm charging you for every
Yeah.
minute you speak to me, right?
Yeah.
So this is not useful for you. This is not going to be beneficial for you. But in talking to them, I'm sort of able to kind of guide them to what I always believe is the better position to be in, which is to be the more reasonable party, right? If you're kind of insisting on a certain event happening, you have no evidence to substantiate it, and in fact, the other party has evidence that shows the opposite. What is what happens? That's when I have to have a conversation with my client and say, look, I have a duty to represent you and represent your interests. I also have to make sure you get a good outcome in court. And if you're going to insist on something that I just know isn't true, then it's going to prejudice you and prejudice your interests. Sometimes I'm able to really get through to certain clients on that. And other times it's very difficult. And then I kind of have to yell at them and say, listen, if you're not honest, I don't know what else you're going to expect, right? If you want to, denigrate your ex-partner and call them names and say they're this, they're that. But again, you have nothing to back it up, right? You don't even have a consistent story, then just let it go. Let's just focus on what we have, right? Yeah. It's difficult. It's complex, right? Like I know there are certain people who, if they kind of listen to this or, talk to me, they'll probably say that I'm like anti-women or,
no,
I'm but it's a complex job. People are complex, and nothing is ever even people who have been victims of abuse and who, have very much been, it's not really a question of whether they have been. I'm not saying they're at all complicit in their abuse or anything of that sort, but even they aren't, there's no such thing as a perfect victim, right?
Right.
There's never such thing as a perfect victim. And, always looking at people who kind of come from that, frame of mind as complete and utter victims and helpless isn't actually very useful, ultimately, in family court. Yeah. You do have to be a little bit, it's hard to talk about this sometimes. I can't really give very specific examples. But,
sure. Well, maybe let's move to. I'm curious because I don't know how much more time you have, but I wanted to ask you about. So, say someone does find themselves in an abusive situation or just a situation that they want to get out of. What are the steps you recommend taking? What resources are there? Where can they go, etc.? Yeah.
So there are a number of charities and women's shelters that they should go to. Now, again, it's hard. A lot of people, even though they know that they're being abused, they think that, I know I'm a victim of abuse and I'm sort of trapped in my home with this abusive partner, but I can't leave. How can I go to a women's shelter that's for quote unquote poor women, right? Mm-hmm. Homeless women. I'm not a homeless person, but actually that's the first place you should go. You should contact someone. And the first thing you can do to help yourself and your children, if there are children, is removing yourself from the situation. And a lot of women who have been abused have been isolated from friends, from family, have maybe even geographically just far from anyone they know, right? As a result of being in an abusive marriage. So the first step is, if you don't have a family member or friend who you trust, who you can go to, you contact a shelter and you do it in secret. And you leave quietly. And you call the police, right? You can call the police if you want an escort, right? If you fear that, because sometimes, I'll be honest, I'm very much ACAB, don't like police, I'm a criminal defense lawyer as well. Lawyer, police may come up and they'll say, oh, well, there's no evidence of any abuse, you seem fine, and then carry on and leave, and then you're stuck with an angry person who knows now that you call the police on them, right? So I would say leave, remove yourself from the situation, and do it quickly and quietly. If you're Muslim, there's in Ontario, and I think in Alberta and Montreal as well, there's Sakina Homes, which is actually run by an old university friend of mine, Zainab, who should absolutely have on the podcast if she ever has time. But she runs an amazing women's shelter specifically for Muslim women, because it's needed, right? And it erases a lot of the stigma, because in Muslim communities, like going to a shelter is seen as like such a betrayal, and is highly stigmatized, right? So there's that. There's also Nissa Homes in Ontario. I know in New York there's a Muslim women's shelter as well. And if you don't have a woman, if you're Muslim and you're trying to leave a violent relationship, you don't just go to a shelter. That's your first step, is removing yourself from the situation, because the person most likely to kill you it's like statistically is like your abusive partner, right? If you have an abusive partner, you're statistically more likely to be murdered by them. So it's not really a question of, oh, maybe he'll change, maybe he'll do this. If he's hitting you, you should leave immediately. If he hits you, you should leave immediately. If he's verbally abusing you, should leave immediately. If he's emotionally abusing you, if he's like neglecting you, just leave, right? Everything else is for your caseworker and your lawyers to figure out. But that's what I would recommend.
I was going to say, because you're not like a caseworker, right? So do most of the people that you work with, have they already extracted themselves from the situation? I'm guessing like they're already at that point where they are no longer like in the house. Yeah.
No. So I have clients who come to me and they say, I'm still living with him. What do I do? And I can only refer them to like caseworkers and organizations and stuff, because I can't, like, there's been times where I have felt personally like I just want to get in my car and pick up this person and bring them into my house, but I can't. I just can't, right? I might. Who knows, right? Like who's going to stop me? But like I tell my clients, like, if the police are involved or the police are called, just give the phone to me. Like give your phone to me when the police arrive, and I'll talk to the police, because oftentimes it's such a jarring and traumatic experience for these women that, like, what do I say? What do I do? I don't want them to incriminate themselves. I don't want them to end up in a situation where the police leave, right? So, again, I'm anti talking to the police, but I will talk to the police in certain situations.
Gotta use the tools
I have
that you
spoken
have.
to the police. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So the following steps, so it sounds like removing yourself from the situation, but then beyond that, once you're at that step, there are people who will help you continue the process of being able to fully extricate yourself from that situation.
Like the first step is the hardest, is actually making that's something that I will say you're alone in. If you're being abused, you are alone in that. You're not alone in the sense of like if you want to email me or you want to like message someone and they can encourage you, but nobody can remove you from that situation from yourself. It takes an immense amount of strength, an immense amount of courage. But I can say that once you make that step, there are people waiting with like wide open arms, waiting to help you, waiting to put you in a better situation. Yeah. So, but you have to make the first step.
Yeah. And okay, so maybe closing on this, something a little bit more positive is, I don't want people like listening to this to get the sense, again, Zainab, like you said, like this is not something that is endemic to the Muslim community.
100%, right? We're just talking about one iteration of
but also like there is a diaspora community that maybe expects to do things one way, doesn't fully understand the systems ramifications of like a legal system that is not built on, around their specific culture. So certain issues can arise there, especially when you have bad actors or guys who are like taking advantage of that situation, for sure. But I think this there are things that I think that I found from like kind of like a Muslim legal framework that are actually opportunities to be able to have discussions, although these things are not enforceable at all, right? Like, but like having
like
discussions earlier
kind of,
on,
yeah.
right? Like knowing that these sorts of things are potentially out there.
Which sounds similar to the kind of like the 100 questions thing that y'all did. Yeah.
I know a lot of communities will also encourage young couples to do premarital counseling, maybe with an imam. Zainab, what's your thought on this? Like, would you say like, oh, go to your like local imam or just like whoever you feel comfortable with? Because I don't know.
Not all imams are equal. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Not all of them have like the best the best train. I was gonna say legal, but you know, yeah.
Oh yeah. Like I've had when I was unmarried, I had an imam do a surprise ruqya on me. Like they thought I had a jinn attached to me because that's why I was getting married.
What?
Oh my god.
Yeah.
What is that like?
That's a story for offline.
Okay.
It was just like recite this ayah of the Quran and then staring at me like, did you feel weird on your side? I was
Wait,
like,
so
no.
without you asking for any kind of help, this man came up to you and was like, I perceive it a jinn.
Yeah, like I had no.
Oh my god, motherfucker.
Like, you know, it's just it was an insane thing to happen. But so yes, not all the moms are created equal. Like, this is the part of my job that I'm like very like I'm really happy that I am in family law and I'm specifically serving the Muslim community, because not only do I feel like I'm obviously helping members of my community, but I also feel like because I have an insight into so many marriages, the breakdown of so many marriages, it's really kind of shown me what makes or breaks a successful relationship. And I've been married for like close to 2 years. So, you know, definitely not any, you know, huge marriage expert or anything like that. But, you know, the advice I do generally give for people, young Muslims looking to get married is, first of all, log off Twitter. Ignore Twitter.
Oops.
Don't listen to anything that anyone is saying on Twitter ever if they have UK Muslim in their bio, quite frankly. And a UK Muslim is saying that. It may not sound like one, but I'm saying that, right? So you have that endorsement. You know, look, everyone has certain boundaries that they have that are either informed through like them personally or through their deen, right? And those boundaries are fine to have. But, you know, when you're speaking to somebody for the purposes of marriage, communicate what those boundaries are, right? Especially as a woman, communicate what your boundaries are, right? I'm not comfortable with this. I am comfortable with that. 'Cause it's all dependent on you. And
and I'll say, if you start to communicate those boundaries and then the guy like suddenly seems like annoyed or less interested, like that's a sign to just get the fuck out of there, right? Because once the honeymoon phase is over, then you're stuck with the person who just is annoyed by your boundaries, you know? Exactly. And look, my next piece of advice is, I would say, if any, like, you know, parents are listening, very controversial, but you don't need to tell your parents that you're talking to someone. They can know once you've kind of pretty much have made the decision or are very close to making that decision. Yeah,
we co-signed that.
That's kind of what we did, because we knew that once my parents found out, that would just be like pressure.
A lot of pressure.
Yeah. So we honestly I met Ahmad's parents like a month before we got married, because we knew that it would just create kind of a timeline.
But they knew
they did know that you were talking to someone and that I existed, but we just kind of waited until we were ready. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, you don't need to like heavily involve your parents in the decision making process. There's really only people and Allah, right? It's you, the person you're talking to, and God, right? And you know, again, I know everyone's level of religiosity varies, right? But the best thing you can do when you're talking to someone and you're close to making that decision is just make a istikhara. Like, you know, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It's like literally just 2 nafil and a dua, and just do it consistently. Because why do you need outside counsel from anyone other than really God, right? And also, but you know, and I'm not saying like just blindly do that as well. You tie your own camel. Understand yourself. Understand who you are. Understand where you are in life. Don't sell someone a dream, either as a man or a woman. Yeah. But talk and communicate. That's really the only way. You have to understand someone. And again, you will never fully know. You will never fully understand until you're actually married. Because, you know, as much as I knew that, you know, my husband was the one for me, I mean, I laugh about it with him now, but, you know, the night before the wedding, I was like, oh my God, am I actually going to do this? There's always that element of risk and fear. So to be kind of comfortable with that, but it shouldn't be all risk and it shouldn't be all fear. Yeah. You know, also think about what's motivating you to be married. So, you know, it's a personal decision. It's between you and that person and God, really. And it doesn't need to be, you don't need to involve families. You don't need to.
Yeah, I will say, I think the other really valuable thing about just like having those discussions earlier and really getting to know the person is, like you said, there's always that element of like risk and like unknown with getting married, right? But if you have a solid foundation or framework, like hopefully you've gotten to know like what is this person's like actual, like how do they see a partner or like a relationship fitting into their lives. Like I might not know what this person's going to be like in 5 or 10 years, but at least I have some base level of commitment for how they want to be able to function in a relationship and how they see
where are they
like,
headed,
handling
like what's
unknowns,
the
right?
And you have to have, I think, a strong sense of self-worth as well, for sure. You know, if you're struggling with your self-esteem and you're, you know, thinking, oh, well, who's going to marry someone like me? Well, that's not a great place to start looking for a person, right? And you know, I can just say, oh, love yourself and stuff, but like, you know, really believing in your own sense of self-worth it's an ongoing practice. And as long as you're always trying to engage in it, right, and see who your value as a person, I think that's a good place to start. But you know, having a sort of a defeatist attitude. And oftentimes it can be because you're in a toxic environment at home, right? A lot of young Muslims still live with their parents when, you know, they're talking to somebody for the purposes of marriage. So, you know, like just, I don't take anything in your life for granted or as a constant. Yeah. Always question. And you know, this is a whole other podcast, right? Yeah. Which we won't get into, but you know, there's so much more that goes into it. It is complicated, but it's also very simple at the same time. Yeah.
I think that's a nice place to end, like a more uplifting note, and really beautifully said. I really appreciate the way you framed that.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention that we didn't get to, Zainab?
No, I think we covered everything. There's always like so much more we can talk about. If there's any cool latest developments in the world of family law or any groundbreaking family law decisions in the UK.
A new kind of family member.
We can do like an emergency podcast.
Yeah. That sounds good.
Yes.
I learned a lot from you. Thank you. I feel like I didn't even really understand fully what family law was. I'm realizing now. So it was super helpful.
Oh, no worries. It was really nice talking